on a Monday. Coming up, hour number 2, former gubernatorial candidate Guy Noor will be joining us. Talk more of the local political spectrum, unless you're living under a rock. Made national news, of course. Democrats controlling the Senate. Catherine Cortez Masto passing the election-denying Adam Laxalt. Thank God, by the way. But, there are still races out that are slow. It looks like Kari Lake's going to lose, and then she'll cry fraud, and because she's a nutbag. That's what Kari Lake is. Someone who I would call a little crazy, but a liar, and somebody who, in my personal opinion, doesn't have a lot of decency. He's lied about his life. He's lied about working for the FBI or police or whatever the hell else he claims he was with.
He's got Dudley Do-Right badges,
yeah.
Brian.
Yeah, he lied about his grades. The guy's lied about everything. Herschel Walker, I can't even believe this is going into a runoff. I can't even believe it's this close. Warnock is somebody that I definitely would vote for if I could, because I think he's a decent man who cares about people, and I agree with a lot of his policies. So the lady joining us right now on the line, she ran for lieutenant governor. She's a surrogate for the Warnock campaign. Sarah Riggs Amico joining us right now on the line. Sarah, thank you so much for joining us. How are you? Sarah, can you hear me?
I can. I'm well. It's good to be with y'all. Sorry about that.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you for joining me. I appreciate it. Thanks for coming on. All right, so Sarah, I guess this would be my first question for you. Are you surprised that this race is this close, that it's even coming down to a runoff?
Look, I am surprised that anyone votes for Herschel Walker here in Georgia. He's utterly unfit and unqualified to serve in the U.S. Senate. And we have a current senator in the Reverend Dr. Raphael Warnock, who is not only competent and has delivered for this state time and time again, but is a man of character. So it really is no contest from my perspective which of these two men can better serve the people of our state. But I will say, look, there were only 2 statewide candidates out of 9 here in Georgia on the Republican ticket who couldn't clear 2 million votes. And Herschel Walker was one of them. He was the only statewide Republican candidate who didn't get it done on November 8th. So voters know he's not fit to be in the U.S. Senate. And I think in the end, they're going to reelect Reverend Warnock. He underperformed, Herschel Walker underperformed Governor Kemp, the Republican governor who was just reelected here, by 200,000 votes on election day. And as you mentioned, Herschel Walker is somebody who's lied to the people of Georgia about everything from whether or not he was the valedictorian of his college class. He didn't graduate. The size of the businesses that he ran and created. He said it was one of the largest minority-owned firms in the country. He had 6 employees. He also couldn't even tell us the truth about the number of children he had. So I don't think Georgians are going to send a pathological liar to the U.S. Senate. And that's really the choice. You've got a choice between the man who's a pastor, Raphael Warnock, and an incumbent senator who's delivered the goods for our state, and a pathological liar who was 200,000 votes short of the governor in his own party under him on the ballot on November 8th.
Mm-hmm. Sarah, it's interesting because, you have so many Republicans out there that are so angry that Fetterman beat Dr. Oz. And I have a lot of respect for Fetterman after having a stroke and having the courage to get up there, on a national stage in a debate. And I think that's one of the reasons why they voted for him, quite frankly. But you hear a lot of Republicans saying, how could you vote for Fetterman? The guy can't even put a sentence together, blah, 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 blah. And have they heard Herschel Walker talk? Have they heard how incoherent he is? What's his excuse? Maybe he got hit too many times in the head as an NFL player. I don't know. How can any Republican argue to a Democrat, how could you vote for Fetterman when they support this man? I don't understand that.
Yeah, first of all, there was a lot of ableism that underpinned all of those comments about Senator-elect Fetterman. And the reality is that his auditory processing will improve, whereas Herschel Walker has shown time and again his character will not. His qualifications for the U.S. Senate will not. So I don't know how anybody can take him seriously. I'm trying to imagine what it would look like on the floor of the Senate for Herschel Walker to get up and address the good air and the bad air in China. It's utterly ridiculous. And I think, he knows, and the Republican Party knows. One of the very first events that Herschel Walker had after the runoff was announced here in Georgia was with Senator Ted Cruz, the Republican from Texas. And Senator Cruz took questions from the press and Herschel Walker did not. In fact, he's had over 20 events since the runoff was announced where he didn't take a single question from anyone who wasn't an ultra right-wing conservative media. So I think that the admission, tacit admission as it may be, from Herschel Walker is that he can't answer those questions.
Sarah, obviously the dynamic is much different when we're discussing a runoff as opposed to just a general election. We have a situation now where independents are going to have to either make a decision if they want, or if they're going to vote on one or the other. Talk to us about what that is like, especially in your state there in Georgia. We're here, obviously here in Nevada. We don't have that type of situation. What is that going to be like coming in December, where you're going to have that dynamic between these two men going at it in a runoff type of situation?
Well, look, I'm thrilled to see the reelection of Senator Cortez Masto, but the reality is this Senate seat in Georgia, the cradle of the civil rights movement that is held by the pastor of Ebenezer Baptist Church, the pulpit of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., this Senate seat matters independent of what happens in any other state. And it matters whether or not we have a competent senator who can deliver for our state. It matters whether we have someone who can tell the truth to our state. All of these things bode well for Senator Warnock and his reelection. But let's also not forget that in 2021, in the Senate runoffs that delivered the Senate majority to the Biden-Harris administration, Senator Warnock helped build a turnout operation that netted him millions of votes and flipped this state, flipped control of the U.S. Senate. This is something that I think Georgia Democrats are ready to repeat in this runoff election. And candidly, if there's any dampening of enthusiasm in the Georgia runoff for the Senate seat, I suspect it'll be on the part of Republicans. I mean, think about it. They can't take control of the Senate. Why would they want to take all of the risk associated with Herschel Walker, who has proven time and again that he's not ready to serve in the U.S. Senate? Why would they want the headaches? Why would they want him to be front and center muddling their message? The next time we learn about children he has or abortions he's funded, you know, we've got a saying in Georgia now that we just want our daughters to have the same rights as Herschel Walker's girlfriends.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I think you probably we need to send that message to people like Tom Cotton and Lindsey Graham. God, when I even bring up their names, I just want to vomit. But anyway, that's another story for another show. If you're just joining us, she is Sarah Riggs Amico. She ran for lieutenant governor herself, and she is a surrogate for the Warnock campaign. They're going to be in a runoff against Herschel Walker. So, Sarah, let me talk to you about just from the national spectrum here. It appears to me that for the most part, the majority of Republicans that lost were election deniers. While there are some election deniers that won their races, no doubt about it, to me, this is a referendum on the alt-right, on the Lauren Boebert types, the Marjorie Taylor Greene. Even though Marjorie Taylor Greene won, to me, the alt-right, middle America did not vote for them, for the most part. Do you believe that? And do you believe that is one of the main reasons? With that and abortion, I think abortion was another huge issue that Republicans seem to take for granted. Do you believe those two issues are one of the main reasons why there wasn't this red wave that came?
Absolutely. It was Roe-vember, right? And look, President Biden said this. He said that democracy was on the ballot, that reproductive freedom was on the ballot, and that voters would understand and get to the ballot box accordingly. And he's right. And look, at every turn, President Biden has been underestimated. He was underestimated when he delivered a bipartisan infrastructure bill that 2 decades worth of presidents from both parties had tried but failed to deliver. He was overperforming when he delivered the CHIPS Act. Again, a bipartisan investment in America's competitiveness over the long term in our high-tech sector. He also, remember, managed to get a bipartisan consensus to add Finland and Sweden to NATO. He was also able to get the PAC Act through so we could get health care to our veterans who were exposed to toxins and burn pits during their service. This is a president that consistently exceeds expectations. And so I think having Reverend Warnock on the ballot on December 6th in this runoff election in Georgia will be yet another affirmation that voters are rejecting Trumpism. They are rejecting the alt-right. They are rejecting election deniers, and that they're affirming that women should be able to make the most private, personal healthcare decisions of their lives privately in the privacy of their doctor's office.
So I agree with a lot of what you said there, Sarah. Here's where we might disagree. Again, I'm an independent. If I'm a Democrat, I don't want Joe Biden to run in 2024. Not because I think he's a horrible president, but because I think there are probably better candidates out there. Do you believe that Joe Biden, I know we're 2 years away, I know a lot can happen in 2 years, but as a staunch Democrat, do you believe and are you comfortable with the fact that Joe Biden may run again in 2024?
Look, similar to the abortion conversation, this is a private, personal decision the president and his family will make. And if he runs again, I think he will have a tremendous amount of support. Like I said, this is a president that's over-delivered time and again on all of the issues that matter, whether it was the American Rescue Plan, the CARES Act. Remember, you know, $1,400 checks in the pockets of Georgians in the depths of the pandemic when they really needed it most. Folks are going to remember that. They're going to remember his efforts on student loan relief. I think he's going to be rewarded. And I think that he'll make that decision. He'll make it in a way that's the right one for him and his family. But if you're asking whether I'd sign up for 4 more years of that kind of overperformance with a 50-50 Senate, hell yeah, I would.
If it was your decision, who would you choose on the left if they had to run for president tomorrow? I'm just curious. Can you name me a few names besides Joe Biden? Who are some people that you would support on a national level that you think on the left today would be a great president?
You know, we've got a deep bench, right? I mean, you saw that in the 2020 primary. There are so many good and talented people waiting in the wings in the Democratic Party. We're going to have a deep bench for a very long time. And I think part of the calculus and the decision for the president will obviously be taking that into account. And let's not forget, because this is a personal pet peeve for me. We have the first woman, first Black woman, first Asian American woman, first woman ever elected to national office in Vice President Kamala Harris. And the reality is, if this were a white male vice president and the president didn't run for re-election, I'm not sure that everybody would be circling the wagons trying to pick out who was going to be the front runner. We've got a good and competent history-making vice president in Kamala Harris, and she's going to be a force for years.
Do you believe Kamala Harris would defeat Donald Trump?
I believe any Democrat is going to defeat Donald Trump. Look, Republicans just defeated Donald Trump, right? Republicans wouldn't even vote for his picks in this election. The biggest loser in the 2022 elections by far was not even on the ballot, and it was Donald Trump.
I agree with that 100%. Yep.
Sarah, I'd have to concur with you. To be very frank and be very candid, I think the idea of Herschel Walker being in the United States Senate is one of the more absurd and preposterous notions that I can think of. I've mentioned this to Brian numerous times on the show as the resident Democrat on the show who appears weekly. I don't think that Herschel Walker is qualified to run a Waffle House, much less be sent to Washington, D.C. to make serious decisions that serious people need to make. And I think it's absolutely ridiculous. And so, yes, I am hopeful that Georgians will find a way to handle their business there in your great state and re-elect Raphael Warnock to the United States Senate. And I think that's something that would be beneficial, not just to Georgians, but to Americans as a whole.
I'm confident that's exactly what you'll see. Georgians know what's best for our state. This is a state full of hardworking, practical, good people who have good values, and none of that aligns with electing Herschel Walker. That all aligns with re-electing Senator Raphael Warnock to the U.S. Senate.
So, Sarah, as a independent, when people ask me, what do you think Democrats stand for? I think I have a pretty good idea, right? Obviously, universal health care. Gun control is another issue that's talked about all the time. Talking against voter suppression, wanting to get the vote out, constantly talking about helping the poor, helping the needy, talking constantly about, legalization of not just gay marriage, which is legal pretty much everywhere anyway, but, the negative talk against transgenders, talking about, all those types of issues and giving the woman a right to choose. If people ask me what Democrats stand for, that's pretty much, that hasn't really changed either. But when people ask me what do Republicans stand for, I'm going to be honest with you. I pretty much have no idea. I don't know what they stand for. They say they stand for freedom.
Owning the libs, Brian.
Yeah,
that's what they stand
yet they
for.
want to tell a woman what to do with their body. Secure the border. So what are your solutions? Send people to Martha's Vineyard? Like I used to be able to answer that question, Sarah, 10 years ago. I had a pretty good understanding of what Republicans stood for, and some of which I supported. I have absolutely no idea what Republicans stand for these days. Do you? Because I don't.
I think they're the perfect explanation of one of my favorite sayings, which is, if you stand for nothing, you'll fall for anything. And the Republican Party today stands for nothing, and they've fallen for Donald Trump.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you, Sarah, 150%. When Warnock, and I do believe he's going to win this runoff, when he does, what are the first things he wants to do when he's in office?
You know, I think they've got a lot of things to do still in the lame duck session, right? Going into the rest of the year. Certainly the Electoral Count Act. They've got the debt ceiling conversation. I think they've got the votes, or they soon will have the votes, to codify marriage equality. I think Justice Clarence Thomas and his concurrence to the Dobbs decisions put that in question. And that's terrifying to not just families in the LGBTQIA community, but to families like mine who are allies. And I think they've got a lot to do. I still think, remember, you had a long list of all the things that make me proud to be a Democrat. And for what it's worth, I wasn't always a Democrat. 20 years ago, I would have been a Republican. So I'm a capitalist. I'm a Harvard MBA, a business owner. I run a trucking company. So I understand what it means to make a payroll. And I think that Democrats also stand for democracy, for the stability in our democratic institutions, and to prevent the erosion that the extreme right wing, the assault that they've had in everything from the right to vote to the January 6th insurrection. And remember, our economy is deeply tied to the stability of those democratic institutions as well. So I think we've got a lot going for us. And as a business owner right now, I've got to say it would be hard to vote for anyone outside of the Democratic Party. This is the party that's tackling a lot of the issues that matters in our economy as well. So, you know, from my perspective, there's never been a starker contrast between the Democratic Party and the Republican Party than there is right now, particularly on that question of democracy. And I think that's what you saw time and again. Not a single election denier won a Secretary of State race anywhere in this country, whether they were an incumbent or a challenger. If they were an election denier running to be the chief administration officer for elections, the Secretary of State, they lost. That is an extremely loud renunciation of Trumpism and of everything we saw culminating on January 6th.
Sarah, we had that situation obviously here in Nevada with Jim Marchand, who was running on the Republican side as well, too. Now, look, you talked about the deep bench when it comes to Democrats. One of those people that I think is instrumental when it comes to Democrats and getting out the vote is in your state. And that's Sarah. Of course, I'm talking about Abrams. She was outstanding, despite the fact that Brian Kemp was able to win re-election. Talk about the impact that she's had, particularly with respect to voter rights, and where you think she stands as far as her place in the Democratic Party moving forward from here on out.
Look, Stacey's been a star for a long time, and she's still a star. She sailed into some pretty strong, insurmountable headwinds last week, and it's heartbreaking for those of us who know her. As you know, I ran on the ticket with her as her nominee for lieutenant governor in 2018. So I know her well. I consider her a friend, and I don't think we've seen the last of her. The great thing about Stacey, and we really saw this after the 2018 election, is she didn't need a title or an office to do the right thing. She set out right after a devastating loss to tackle voting rights, not just in Georgia, for the whole country. And remember, a lot of this infrastructure for organizing that's been done by incredible organizations here in Georgia, specifically Black-led organizations, that really laid the foundation for flipping the state in 2020 for Kamala Harris and Joe Biden, and for picking up those 2 Senate seats in January 5th, 2021. So Stacey was an integral part of that. She really led this effort to speak to infrequent voters, to speak to people in marginalized communities who, in a state that is as gerrymandered as Georgia is, a lot of times feel unseen, unheard, and unvalued by the Republicans that have controlled the state for the last 2 decades. Stacey spoke to them. And, you know, when we ran in 2018, we went everywhere and talked to everyone. Nothing was off the table. You didn't have to agree with us on anything. And I think you're going to continue to see that kind of engagement from her going forward in whatever capacity she chooses. The one thing she will not lack for is options. And I'm devastated she won't be our next governor. But I'm so proud of the campaign she won and of the way that she inspired people to think about what the future can look like when everyone has equal access to that American dream, to opportunity, to economic stability and justice and empowerment. These are really important issues that we're going to have to continue to talk about, not just in Georgia, but around the country until we get it right.
No doubt. Sarah, it's been a pleasure having you on. I really do appreciate your time. And hopefully if Warnock does win, which I believe he will in the runoff, we'd love to have you on again down the road. And thank you so much for joining us, Sarah. We appreciate you.
Thank you, Sarah.
Absolutely.